Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Linda Worley. I'm the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies, and I'm here for the Faculty of Arts, and I'm here to represent the Faculty of Arts and to welcome you to this event. I'm very privileged to live and work and to meet with you here today on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Neutral, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is located on the Haulabin Tract, which is a piece of land that encompasses 6 miles on either side of the Grand River and was gifted to the Six Nations in 1784. This is the second in a series that we're calling the Indigenous Speaker Series. It will be an annual event. We had our first event last year where we invited Sylvia McAdam to come and speak, and I'm sure many of you enjoyed that presentation as well. And there will be another presentation later on this term in February. But today, and I won't introduce Kateri Akiwenzie-Damm, I will leave that to my colleague Laurie Campbell, but I just wanted to tell you a few words about the Indigenous Indigenous Speaker Series and why we thought that this was something that we wanted to organize. It is a collaborative endeavor between the Faculty of Arts and the Waterloo Aboriginal Education Centre. And it is one small contribution to work that is finally, I will say, beginning here at the University of Waterloo to indigenize our institution. This is a contribution from the Faculty of Arts, but of course indigenizing the university means all faculties across the university, staff, students, faculty members, everyone. We are on Indigenous land. It is important that we not only acknowledge that, but that we learn from Indigenous people. And that is really the motivation, or if you like, the goal of the Indigenous Speaker Series, is to bring to this campus Indigenous people who are intellectuals, who have their knowledge to share with us, who can teach us an awful lot about how to live in a good way on Turtle Island. So this gives me great pleasure to be part of this. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to learn from Indigenous people in various walks of life, whether they be writers, publishers, as is the case today, or intellectuals in other capacities, educators, lawyers, activists, artists, from all walks of life, environmentalists, scientists, everybody. So I invite you to enjoy today's presentation and also to ask questions at the end of Kateri's talk. I would also like you to know that she is a terrific author and her books are on sale, and she will be signing after the talk just outside in the lobby. So we have several copies of her books for sale, and you can meet the author. So that's all I really wanted to say about the Indigenous Speaker Series. And now I'd like to invite Amy Smoke and other members of the Waterloo Indigenous Students Association to come up and welcome us in the traditional way.
Tego Sewagwego. My English name is Amy Smoke. I'm Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan from the Six Nations of the Grand River. And I am the events coordinator at the Waterloo Indigenous Student Center. And I was one of the first students to take the Mohawk language class here at the University of Waterloo. And we were taught the Ohando Garawandekwa, the Thanksgiving address, or literally translated, the words that come before all else. Probably the most important words I'll ever learn in my language. So we'd like to offer that for you here today. Se wate hosios ni gare wasa ni gare ohando gare wandakwa ande wawa no hetste. Agoigo anska ande de wahwe nuni ne angwat ni gora tanu dietino horadu ne yadi ni stanha owanja Mother Earth. Etoni undu hakne ne angwat ni gora. Agoigo anska ande de wahwe nuni ne angwat ni gora tanu dietino horadu ne yongi sota Grandmother Moon. Etoni undu hakne ne angwat ni gora.
Agoigo anska and the wahe nuni ne ngwatnigura that new the anterior radio ne ongwasua the people adoni and duhak ne ngwatnigura. Agoigo anska and the wahe nuni ne ngwatnigura that new the anterior radio ne ganya gai runyo. Adoni and duhak ne ngwatnigura. Agoigo anska and the wahe nuni ne ngwatnigura that new the anterior radio ne ganya gai runyo. Adoni and duhak ne ngwatnigura. Agoigo anska and the wahe nuni ne ngwatnigura that new the anterior radio ne ganya gai runyo. Adoni and duhak ne ngwatnigura.
Agwego Oscar under the Wahwe Noni ne Ongwatnigura. Dahno de Atinu Hueradun ne Gayeri Nikawarage, the four directions. Atonyon Duhakne Ongwatnigura. Agwego Oscar under the Wahwe Noni ne Ongwatnigura. Dahno de Chirewanu Hueradun ne Tungwayadisa, the creator. Atonyon Duhakne Ongwatnigura. Ona noa etoniore jiwakweni. Doga ontaa sewage nikoraa ize ngwarihundo aizawara sundaro ne gano wera dunstara. Eto nikawanage dana ona eto.
No.
Nyawa everyone, miigwech. Chloe Indigenous class, Waterloo Najunjaba. My name is Chloe Blair, and I am European Algonquin from the Bonchar Algonquin First Nation. And it is my great honor to be here today to thank Kateri for sharing the space with us and sharing your words and your wisdom. So I'd like to offer you some tobacco as a thanks for your time and your words.
Buju, Emma Dijnikas, Bekejunong Dunjaba, Mengadodem. My name is Emma, and I'm president of the Aboriginal Student Association, our Indigenous Student Association. I'd like to welcome our student drummers up to join us. We're going to sing you Strong Woman, and it's a song from the Kingston Women's Prison during the riots when the women stood up and they sang this song. And we're singing it today to honor Kateri because she is a strong woman, and we want to acknowledge that. Miigwech.
Tanse, hello. Nijije tanon. Otai ayan kikistit mehinawa mi wasin taskamo. I'm very pleased to be here today, and it's my honor to welcome Kateri Akiwenzie-Damm to the University of Waterloo and to our Indigenous speaker series. Kateri is a writer, poet, spoken word performer, libertist, and activist from the Chippewas of Nawash First Nation at the Anishinaabe, formerly known as Cape Croker Reserve of the Bruce Peninsula. Kateri is a force in the literary scene in Canada and in the world. She has initiated many important projects on behalf of Indigenous writers and artists of Turtle Island, as well as exciting collaborations with artists in New Zealand and Australia. In 1993, she founded the Kegedonce Press to publish the work of Indigenous writers and artists. Kegedonce Press is one of the very few literary publishing houses devoted to Indigenous writers. It continues to produce anthologies and single-author books of distinction, including the work of acclaimed authors such as Ojibway writer Basil H. Johnston and Métis writers Marilyn Dumont and Gregory Schofield. Kateri's work has been published internationally in journals and in anthologies, and she has performed and spoken around the world. She is the editor of the award-winning Skins Contemporary Indigenous Writing in 2000 and Without Reservation Indigenous Erotica in 2003, and she has also released 2 poetry and music CDs. Her recent book, The Stone Collection, received a starred review from Publishers Weekly and was a finalist at the Sarton Literary Award. The Stone Collection is a collection of stories which delves into complex and dangerous emotions, exploring the gamut of modern Anishinaabe experience. Through unforgettable characters, these stories about love and lust, suicide and survival, illness and wholeness, illuminate the strange workings of the human heart. And most recently, Kateri wrote the Globe and Mail opinion piece, "The Cultural Appropriation Debate is Over, It's Time for Action." Hear, hear. Please join me in welcoming our special guest, Kateri. Thank you.
Bujo, thank you so much. Chimiigwech, what a beautiful way to start. I'm just really touched, and I'm so happy to be here amongst old friends and new friends, and to be here in this territory. It's been a long time since I've been in Waterloo, so it's great to be back here. It's kind of interesting and embarrassing to listen to your own bio being read. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I would really like to thank everyone who put this event together, Susan and Linda, and I don't even know how many people it took to do all of this. So to all of you, I would like to say Chimiigwech, and I sincerely thank you. And I thank everyone who's here today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and learn a little bit about Indigenous literature, which is what I'm hoping to talk to you about today. Before we start, I guess I should say, and happy 2018. It's still January, right? So I guess we can still get away with that. 2017, what a year that was. Wow. So some of you might already know what a challenging, demanding, and inspiring year it was for Indigenous writers. We battled CanLit, faced off against some of the biggest names in Canadian literature, some of the stalwarts of the old establishment in CanLit, and took on the Writers' Union of Canada, the stomping grounds of some of those writers. Make no mistake, it was exhausting, frustrating, and unbelievably for 2017, very necessary. And we did it. But today, when I look back, I choose to see the incredible accomplishments, opportunities, and movements to create, recreate, and reclaim. And I'd like to speak about them mostly today. After generations of writers working to hold space and create opportunities for Indigenous literatures, after decades of standing against those who spoke over us, about us, misrepresented us, and stole our stories as their own, after always resisting those who told us that our stories were simplistic, that readers were not interested, that our artistic and literary traditions needed to be abandoned or edited and rewritten to conform to Western canons, and that our stories and cultures were only legitimized through the lens provided by non-Indigenous writers and editors, there are signs that we finally punch through to the light. That's what I want to talk about. That's what I want to focus on. Right now, Indigenous writers are working together to bring the Indigenous literary community together through gatherings to establish networking and advocacy circles for the literary arts. This will further strengthen our voices, and now that some doors have been opened, help us to push them fully open. We've never had this before, amazingly. Instead, we've always networked informally, found allies and champions, and some of us have created events to bring us together. To know that we'll have our own circle of literary arts is uplifting. It's been a long time coming, and as some recent controversies have shown, it's much needed. One of those controversies raged for months during the first half of 2017. The issue wasn't new. In fact, in 1989, the issue of appropriation of voice was hotly debated at the Writers' Union of Canada, when non-Indigenous writers were told by my cousin Lenore Kijik-Tobias in her Globe and Mail article to stop stealing Native stories. I never would have imagined back in 1989, when I saw that article, that almost 28 years later, I'd be writing a Globe and Mail article about the same issue, fighting back against the same tired arguments. I never would have imagined that in 2017, after decades of debate, the issue would again come to a head when the editor of the Writers' Union of Canada's Write magazine published an editorial calling for an appropriation prize, and doing so in an issue showcasing Indigenous writing and publishing. After the editor resigned, a group of Canadian journalists jumped on Twitter to joke, as they called it, about cultural appropriation and to donate to an appropriation prize. The backlash was swift and resulted in a crowdfunding campaign to support emerging Indigenous writers. It was launched on a Monday with a goal to raise $10,000. And by the Wednesday, it had raised $30,000. When it ended 4 months later, the campaign had collected $116,565 from 1,563 donors. That's incredible. It was the grassroots. It was people from across this country coming together and saying, no, that is not okay. We want to contribute. We want to support Indigenous writers. We want to support Indigenous voices. And the impetus to provide more space. We want to say no to those journalists who thought it was a joke, who thought it was appropriate to go on Twitter late at night and start talking about an appropriation prize while denigrating Indigenous writers and their work. It was an amazing feeling to witness that, to see so many people come together, and not just, see institutions backing us, because I'm not sure that institutions have ever been our first line of defense. In fact, they often have worked against us. So it was really heartening to see that. A total of $141,000 was eventually raised, and the resulting new awards, called the Indigenous Voices Awards, will support Indigenous literary diversity and complexity, honoring the sovereignty of Indigenous creative voices while rejecting cultural appropriation. For its inaugural year, 8 emerging Indigenous writers will receive awards. The awards recipients will be announced May 31st of this year, and I'm very happy to say that I'm on the jury for those awards, and I'm so excited to be able to read through those submissions and to contribute to what I believe is a transition in the way that Indigenous literature is regarded. In fact, one of the signs that I'm seeing is that more and more so-called mainstream publishers are actively seeking Indigenous literatures to add to their lists. They're reaching out to Indigenous writers in ways that they haven't in the past. Literary festivals as well are also reaching out. I saw that the Thin Air Winnipeg Writers Festival just recently was looking for people to apply for new positions for an Indigenous lit project that they're doing. So it's great to see that. I have to say I'm a bit jaded, and at the same time I think it's fantastic, and I'm also wondering, and I know that some of it's really you know, these organizations jumping on board, because right now Indigenous literature is hot. Yay, finally, finally, yes, Indigenous literature is hot. And that's not just the Indigenous erotica that I worked on for years and years, which is also hot, let me tell you. No, Indigenous lit is hot. It's being sought out. You know, and I have to say too that while I am a bit wary sometimes of things, I also believe that finally what happened last year is that many, many people in different positions in media, in literary festivals, different publishing companies, editors groups, and so on, finally took it upon themselves to look at our writers and their work and to see what I have always, always seen: world-class literatures that deserve a place with other world literatures. Finally. So, in 2018, my publishing company, Kegedonce Press, is celebrating its 25th anniversary. It's incredible that we survived 25 years. Yes. Thank you very much. And miraculously, the Harbourfront Festival has reached out to us to organize an event. So we're going to be putting on some sort of a celebratory event at the festival at Harbourfront this fall, and hoping to do some other things to celebrate and acknowledge the writers who have worked with us over those years, and as well as the many other people, editors, graphic designers, and so on. Because when Kegedonce Press first started, it started in 1993, but it took a long time to get any momentum. We had so little support, and we didn't have an industry as a foundation, whereas other publishers have that. That's all there for them. We didn't. In fact, we didn't have really Indigenous book designers, for example. So when we were working on our books, we had to find designers, we had to find people who we could work with and develop those skills. It was that way for so many things. We had to really work, even our writers, so many of them were not accustomed to what it takes to get published. They didn't understand the process. They didn't really understand the editing process. And so we spent a lot of time investing in developing that and trying to develop the skills and the understanding. And, you know, at the same time, to find ways of working and working with our writers that were grounded in Indigenous values. And I don't think we've always gotten it right, but I think we've tried, and we've been very conscious about how we edit people's work. We've worked very, very diligently to ensure that when we're editing, that we're supporting and honoring the voices of the people that come to us. Not a small thing, because so many of our writers have had experiences of having editors change their work to make it more palatable, to make it more publishable. So we've really tried to counteract that in the way that we do things. So I'm so proud that we've been able to hang in there for 25 years. It's been a struggle. It wouldn't have happened without, I have a friend, Renee Abram, who works with me, and both of us have worked without pay and taken on other jobs just so that we could continue to work, or at times I've put money into the publishing company just to keep it going because it's so important to create that space. And we're proud of what we've accomplished. So I hope you'll join us in celebrating that 25 years. I hope, as we plan events, that if you can attend, that you'll do that. It's, as was mentioned, there are so few Indigenous publishers that are able to maintain themselves for any length of time. So I think there's Status Books, the longest running Indigenous publishing house. They're out in the Okanagan. And there's a publishing arm at the Gabrielle Dumont Institute, publishing Métis literature. Pemmican is still publishing Métis literature as well. And that's it. 4 Indigenous publishing houses, and we all struggle. We're all constantly on the brink of closing down because we are not eligible for some funding. So 25 years is an amazing accomplishment. And I think that, what makes me so proud of it are the writers and the voices that we've been able to introduce to people. And we've been able to do projects that to me are so meaningful, and I think have been meaningful to other people, like Without Reservation, the Indigenous erotica anthology. I have to say, the last time I was here, I did a talk at St. Jerome's College. Yeah, St. Jerome's. And I mentioned that at that time, this was quite a while ago, that at that time I was starting to work on Indigenous erotica. And I said those 2 words together, Indigenous erotica, and this is what I heard. And saw. Like, people were like, Indigenous erotica, those things isn't it protest literature? So, yeah, it's, we've come a long way since then. When I started working on Indigenous erotica, my goal was that, especially once I got that reaction in a few places that, Indigenous erotica, what? I thought, what I really, really hope we can accomplish is to reclaim that for ourselves, tell those stories for ourselves, and someday it will just take its rightful place back in our stories. We won't have to work at it. For a while, I talked to so many people. I went out and visited people, and I asked them to send me their stories and their poetry and so on. And the thing was, every Indigenous artist, writer that I spoke to, a lot of them were kind of already thinking along those lines, but a lot of them, I could see it was like a light bulb went off. They were like, yes, yes. But there was one person who was way beyond that. And does anyone know Richard Van Camp, or know of Richard Van Camp, the writer, the dog group writer? He's Mr. Enthusiastic, right? Am I right? He's like a cheerleader. He's so, and I asked him about it, and he was like, yes, okay, yes, I'm going to send you something. I think he had a whole closet full of erotic stories, because I got like a huge package in the mail from Richard. He's great, but it was so funny because everybody else, pretty much, I would wait, and maybe a year later, some poems or a short story would show up in my mail box. But Richard, he was raring to go. He had a stockpile of erotica just waiting for a home. So I'm proud to say we gave it a home. I'd like to say that in 2017, I do think there was a shift, and it's so gratifying and uplifting that at the same time all of those things were going on, those battles were being fought, Indigenous writers won a slew of international, national, and regional awards in 2017, including the Amazon.ca First Novel Award, the Griffin Poetry Prize, a National Magazine Gold Prize, Governor General's Awards, the Giller Prize, the Kirkus Prize, the Journey Prize, and the Rogers Trust Fiction Prize. And I want to read to a list of some of those awards. And I don't think this is entirely inclusive. I think there are probably a few that I missed, which is a great thing to be able to say that there were so many that I couldn't keep track of them. But I think I might have, this isn't comprehensive by any means. But I want to list them because I think it's so, so important, and I want to honor them today. I want to celebrate them today. Jordan Abel, a Niska writer, won the Griffin Poetry Prize for his book Injun. Alicia Elliott, a Tuscarora writer, won a 2017 National Magazine Gold Prize for her essay, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. She also got a book deal and has become a real mover and shaker in Indigenous literature. Incredible. I had met her earlier last year, and she was an emerging writer, obviously just so full of talent, and it was incredible to see the growth last year, and to see her win that national award was really uplifting and confirming for so many of us. Katerina Vermette, a Métis writer, won the Amazon.ca First Novel Award for The Break, and she also won the Burt Award, which is an Indigenous literature award. Cherie Dimeline's The Marrow Thieves. Has anybody read The Marrow Thieves? No? Oh, you have to read it. You have to read it. It's so great. It won the Governor General's Award for Young People's Literature and the Kirkus Prize for Young Readers' Literature. Cherie is Métis, and wow, what a year she had last year. Just amazing. She just was everywhere. Incredible. She's a great writer, a huge, huge talent. If you haven't heard of her yet, you certainly will. Eden Robinson, surely you've heard of Eden Robinson? Yes, some of you? Eden Robinson, Son of a Trickster, was shortlisted for the Giller Prize and won the Rogers Trust Fiction Prize last year. She's Heisla Heltzuk, and right now she's busily working on, I think she already completed her next novel, and she's already on the next one. So just an incredible talent and so committed to her work. And finally, Eden is a very supportive person, and she's really helped so many young writers in her way by holding them up. David Robertson and Julie Flett, their book When We Were Alone won a Governor General's Award for Young People's Literature. Robertson is Swampy Cree, and the illustrator Julie Flett is Cree Métis. She's also a writer as well. Darlene Naponce, Anishinaabe, she was the finalist for the Writers' Trust McClellan and Stewart Journey Prize for the best short story published in a Canadian literary journal. She is also a filmmaker and just another very talented young writer. Carly Baker's Bad Endings and Leanne Simpson's This Accident of Being Lost were both finalists for the Rogers Trust Fiction Prize. And Tanya Talaga's Seven Feathers was a finalist for the Hilary Weston Writers Prize for Nonfiction, and it was recently, in 2018, shortlisted for the RBC Taylor Prize for Nonfiction. And she's of Ojibway Anishinaabe ancestry. So we have much to celebrate, and for the very first time, I look ahead and I see promise. I see the possibility that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis literatures are finally recognized and in their rightful place in this land, which is not in the margins, but in the center, where they always have been. In the center. This is where our stories come from. We can never, ever, ever be on the margins. I always push back when people talk about Indigenous stories, Indigenous literature, Indigenous people being marginalized. I hate that term. We can't be on the margins in our own land. We are at the center of this land, and our stories come from this land. Really, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. The other thing I wanted to do was to share a story with you from the Stone Collection. And I picked a story that, for me, resonates right now, especially because there are people in my community, from my community, these are two of them, who are right now on a prayer walk for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. They left on December 21st from our community, Chippewas of Nawash First Nation at Anishinaabe, and they have been walking through storms and snow and blizzards and ice, heading out there doing a cross-Canada walk. So I hope you'll follow them and support them. It's a prayer walk. So as they walk, they are praying. Every day they honor one of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and pray for that woman and her family. So I wanted to read a story from the collection that I hope you'll allow me to do that. I hope you can stay for this story. It's called Chloe. Sometimes when I read, I start walking around and moving a lot, so I might move around. Don't be afraid. I'm fairly harmless, really. Chloe. The people hunch in corners in dirt-streaked jeans that are a little too big or a lot too tight, old baseball caps, trucker caps before they were worn by celebrities, stained starter caps of losing teams, and scuffed-up shoes, their dull fish eyes peering into the night. Alistair slows the car. I hear the intake of breath between his teeth, low and slow. He raises his hand, points his finger like a gun, pretends to shoot them one by one. I know his stomach is a huge, hard knot. The small car fills with the stench of their misery and his howling despair. I roll down the window slightly, just to feel the air blow at my temples. No, I say. But it's so fucking awful. He nearly chokes out the words. I know. They'd be better off than living like this. He angrily waves his arm at them, at the street, at the dirt and decay and squalor. Come on, I say. You don't know that. Oh yeah, he says, his voice rising, and how will it end? Choking on their own vomit in some rat-infested alley, beaten and left to die, frozen on some roadside, or picked up by some freak who does whatever the hell he wants? I hang my head. It's true. We don't know how much worse it may get for any one of them. But you can't know what joys they have in their lives, who loves them, or where they're headed. This might just be a stop on the way to some other life in some other place. It may be the rock bottom they have to hit before they turn their lives around. It may lead to joy, or freedom, or maybe redemption. He sighs. His knuckles clench the steering wheel. He presses a little harder on the gas. I close my eyes. For a moment, I dream of girls laughing in sunlight, feel the night air flowing across my temples, think of my friend Josie rubbing my temples the night she stopped by for a drink and saw my jaw was frozen by a cold concrete rage that set the muscles tighter and tighter until I could barely move and was blinded by the bright white of pain. I'd lost the baby months before, but some nights I'd find myself frozen like that, like some grotesque statue, sitting for hours in the darkness, my head pounding, too angry to move. Afterwards, I'd be scared by the way it consumed and immobilized me and would burn cedar to clear the anger from the room. That night, Josie rubbed my temples, massaged my face, held my hand in hers, and slowly, slowly chipped away the concrete until it all came crumbling down, and I cried myself to sleep. When I woke, she was sitting quietly with my head in her lap, stroking the hair on my forehead, as if I were a child waking from a nightmare. I knew that she had helped me break through that something, whatever it was, that had such a hold on me. I knew that anger would never again hold me in its tight grip. As we drive, I try to count the people we see so that when I get home, I can smudge and say a prayer for them. Often there are too many to count. Sometimes I count only the ones with the shopping carts, or only the ones sitting down, or only the ones sleeping or passed out. Under his breath, I hear Alistair swearing. He's thinking of his sister. There's nothing I can say to him. None of the stock words of comfort. We both know it's not okay, that it'll never be okay, that she won't be coming home, won't be found. And if by some bizarre twist of fate she ever does return, it'll be in pieces, even if she's still breathing. The dying won't stop. The killing won't stop. The neglect won't stop. The losses will continue to pile up. No good will ever come of it. We'll never know if he could have saved her somehow. If there was some bit of magic that could have kept her safe. The what-ifs are acid. They burn, wound, and fester. We scratch at them, bandage them, but they're always there, eating away at him, and sometimes, like some sort of contagion, eating away at me too. I want to kiss his mouth, long and deep. Not because it'll ease his mind, but because for a moment I want us both to remember that there is love and tenderness, even in this stinking cesspool at the pit of this writhing city. The streetlights flash by. Down every alley, I see people dragging their legs, stumbling into doorways, arms strewn over each other's shoulders or raised in fists, mouths yelling, others slumped against each other, sitting on the curb in pairs or standing in small groups, hands jammed in pockets, eyes darting, watching, always watching, backs to the wall or passed out on the sidewalk in doorways, covered in thin blankets, lean boxer and German shepherd mixes with studded collars and grease-stained handkerchiefs tied around their necks, standing beside them complacently, as if they too have lost hope of anything different, can't remember a full meal, and haven't the energy to run or fight or do anything other than stay by the sides of these stick men and women while the days and nights pass in a blur of sameness. Alistair's sister was only 12 when she left that house on the res, swearing she would never go back. "Let me go with you," he begged her as she gathered her few belongings into a hand-me-down knapsack. "Please, Chloe, please, I want to go, too." She refused. "No." She told him, "You're a boy. He won't hurt you the way he hurts me. You'll be okay." "But you'll be all alone," he said, staring at his feet. "I could look after you," he said, and stretched himself to look as tall as he could. "Allie," she said, tousling his hair, "sometimes it's better to be alone." Looking back, he wondered how she could have been so selfless, so strong at such a young age. "Anyways, if we both go, they'll come looking for us, and we'll be easy to find. By myself, I can disappear." She couldn't have known how true those words were. He wished he'd known then what it meant, stopped her before she began erasing herself. Their mother's boyfriend started it, and he knew in every fiber of his being that some other man with a Wendigo soul finished it. Disappeared. He pulls the Civic over suddenly, slams it into park, and jumps out before it fully stops, stomps towards the sidewalk. I jump out, not knowing what I'm about to face, but ready to stand by him through whatever might come. Sometimes he thinks maybe, just maybe, he spotted her. He'll stare into the face of a haggard-looking prostitute while she half-heartedly lists her skills and the prices. "More if it includes her," she'll say, nodding her head at me. Some of them notice the intensity in his eyes and back away from him, ready to bolt or fight. Worse are the ones who go limp at the sight, stroking a pose of utter submission. "He's looking for his sister," I tell them so they won't be frightened. I want to tell them that his eyes burned like that even when he was a small boy. "I'm sorry," he'll say. "I thought you might..." Sometimes after talking to them, he'll hand them a 20, or because so many of the women on that street are native, a tobacco tie. Most take it. I wonder what they do with them. If maybe one day we'll drive down this street and see tobacco ties hanging from every tree branch and door handle, the women gone, their prayers at last answered. Other times he jumps out of the car and slams his fist into the nearest fence, light pole, or door. He kicks over trash bins or runs until he collapses. I hold him, wishing I could somehow pull the sadness and anger from his body. I should have gone with her, he'll cry sometimes. You were just a boy, I say, holding him on those nights he weeps. If you had, you'd both be gone. She didn't want that. She had enough without the burden of taking you down with her. She wanted you to be free. Please, Al, give her that much. I know. Sometimes his body would go limp as he let the anger seep out. Sometimes, instead, the rage would surface. He'd howl. I should have fucking killed him. I should have beaten that prick 10 times for each time he put his dirty paws on her. He didn't need to. His guilt got him, ate away at him. It wasn't cancer, it was guilt. I hope he suffered, the disgusting maggot. He said this time, the words spitting out, I hope it hurt like hell. Alistair, I said, don't. He died all nicely drugged up in a hospital room with flowers, and my mom holding his hand, holding his filthy hand. Well, Chloe, oh God, God! I close my eyes, inhale deeply, and all alone. I feel him shudder, imagining what might have happened to her, his beautiful sister, with her long limbs and easy grace. We never speak of Picton. The first time a story about it came on the news, Alistair threw up on himself. For days, he holed up in his apartment, refusing to see or to talk to anyone. When I finally convinced him to let me in, I was shocked. He was thinner and pale. He obviously hadn't slept or eaten in days. There were holes punched in every wall. His phone was ripped out of the wall and in pieces. The TV was also in pieces, either kicked in or smashed with a chair. He stood at the door glaring at me with a look that said, I know you won't be able to handle this rage, this whirlwind of grief, daring me to enter. I stepped across the threshold, pulled him to me, and held his chest against mine. His muscles were tensed and rigid, his arms plastered to his sides as if they were all that were holding him together. I held on. He took a sudden deep breath, put his head on my shoulder, burrowed into my neck, and cried for his sister, for all of the missing women, for their brothers, their families, their friends, their communities, and finally, for himself. Later, we silently cleaned his apartment, patched the holes in the walls, threw out the TV and broken furniture, packed his suitcase, and went to my house. He never went back, not even to get the rest of his things. He had brought everything that mattered to him that first night. Everything else I sold or gave away before returning the key to the landlord. I'd known Chloe my whole life. I grew up in the city but spent summers with my grandparents back home on the res. She was almost 3 years older and I rarely saw her, but something about her made me look for her. Every time we went swimming down by the docks and every time we went to the store for penny candy. Mom and Dad wouldn't let Roxy and me go near their house. You girls stay away from the Jackson place, they'd say. Okay, we mean it. Okay, sheesh, we'd say. And don't ever go in, even if they invite you. Just tell them you have to come home. But why? Yeah, why? Just because. Promise. Okay, we promise. We were dying to know why we couldn't ever go inside their house. It looked pretty much like every other house on the res. Not as nice as Nokomis and Mishomis's place, but not as bad as some. What happens in there? We asked each other. Late at night, when we were supposed to be sleeping, we'd chatter in the dark, make up elaborate stories of the kind that only a 7- and 8-year-old could invent. Babies buried in the backyard, naked ladies with pouty lips posed on the couch like we'd once seen on the cover of a Playboy magazine, poorly hidden under one of our older cousins' beds. Frankenstein-type experiments in the basement, rats as big as dogs. It was the not knowing that scared us most, but we knew Chloe and liked her. There was something sweet and vulnerable in her, even though she was faster and stronger than most of the boys and could spend hours swimming on the rare days she wasn't called home right away. She'd dive and splash, laughing and shaking her hair. She was tall and lean with sandy brown hair and hazel eyes that sparkled like sunlight hitting a crest of waves. Her little brother, Alistair, was stockier and thoughtful with a mop of curly black hair and black eyes that were fired with an intensity uncommon in such a young boy. He never strayed far from his sister, and no matter what he was doing, I noticed that he'd look for her every few minutes. If she was smiling, he'd smile and return to what he was doing. If anyone approached her or she looked at all sad or like she needed help, he was immediately by her side. We figured that maybe he did this because for someone so graceful and fluid in the water, she was really clumsy. At least, she always told us she was clumsy when we asked about the bruises. She used to love to swim and wander along the beach looking at stones and shells, bits of driftwood, or pieces of glass worn smooth by the sand and surf. Then one day we met Tom, her stepfather. We were walking on the road near the dock, singing and telling silly jokes when he walked towards us. Roxy and I both took a step back. I'd never felt my hair stand on end before, but at that moment I felt a strange sensation on the back of my neck. "We have to go home now," I told Chloe. I hesitated, instinctively not wanting to leave her alone with him. It was one of the few times we played with her when Alistair wasn't hovering nearby. He'd been sent out on his uncle's fishing boat and wouldn't be home until the next day. When Chloe saw the man walking towards us, the light went out of her eyes. "Come and have dinner with us. Arnoka won't mind," she sighed. "I can't, I'm not allowed." "Please," Roxy and I pleaded, "come on." Chloe looked so sad, like a balloon with a small tear in it. She nodded her head slowly. "I can't." I wanted to take her by the hand and run, feel the wind rushing through our hair as we ran farther and farther from the shadow of the man drawing closer. Instead, I grabbed my little sister's hand and we turned for home, leaving Chloe to face the dark, looming presence of that man by herself. I wanted to be home, laughing in my grandmother's kitchen, eating fish and potatoes. Yet, with each step away from her, my feet felt heavier. I remember stopping and turning back to wave. Chloe was standing in front of him, her head hanging. She seemed wilted as he took her by the wrist. I still see her, a silhouette walking into the sunset, pulled along by the hulking shadow of a man with spider eyes. When we met again years later at a Friendship Center social on the east side in that faraway city, Alistair became my self-appointed protector. Most people assume we're simply lovers, but this is a love they cannot understand. Even I don't try to understand it, have learned not to question it. It is what it is, that's all. He stayed with me a few weeks after I rescued him from his smashed-up apartment. Then he moved into an apartment across the street. It comforts both of us to be close. In the between times, between searches, we play chess, eat pizza at midnight, impersonate people from back home, feed each other scone and fry bread, make dream catchers from whatever we find in the neighborhood, sneak out to matinees, make up 49ers, talk about our dreams of children and log cabins back home on the bay, and enjoy the beauty of this place. During those times, he smiles and laughs. Sometimes it's almost like he forgets there is anything more to want in life. At those times, I wish I could capture him like that and show him to his other self, the one that patrols Hastings Street back alleys, as if somehow that would make all the difference and life could happily move forward. If only he could see the world without the image of his sister's face haunting his every day. We have our own separate lives too. He likes motocross racing. I hate the noise and get bored. He can spend hours in front of the TV playing video games. I can stay up half the night watching musicals and eating black licorice. He believes a phone is purely practical and uses as few words as possible to get the information he needs before hanging up. I think that long-distance rates are a whole lot cheaper than a plane ticket. I love to dance, go out for dinner, occasionally drink too much wine, and flirt. He rarely dates. He says someday he'll get married and have a family, but until then he wants to keep it simple. We both know it means he needs to be able to keep looking for his sister, to spend his money searching for her, to save what he can in case he finds her and she needs care, or, more likely, needs to be taken back home for a proper burial. And I keep turning back to her too, like the little girl I once was, moving towards my own life, but unable to forget her, wanting to look back and find that somehow she's okay and the darkness around her was just a trick of shadow and light. Alistair watches over me like he once did with her, but more careful now, more aware, stronger, less innocent. He insists on meeting every man I date. Most he tolerates just barely, but once I saw him tense and tighten his fists immediately upon meeting a blue-eyed man I barely knew and was supposed to leave to have coffee with moments later. I'd had to make an excuse, sudden migraine, and send the guy packing before Alistair became uncoiled and struck. When the door closed behind the guy, Alistair simply said, "Don't see him or accept his calls. If he gives you any trouble, tell me right away and I'll deal with him." "He seemed nice enough," I said, somewhat fascinated by what had transpired. "He's not." "Oh, Ruthie, Yeah? You're not mad at me, are you? No, I mean, I hardly knew him. I stared at him. I couldn't help it. I'm just curious. How could you tell? You hardly said 2 words to each other. I just know. I don't know how, but he's got a Wendigo inside. It's like I can smell it on him. JJ he liked well enough, eventually. He viewed all of my boyfriends with the same steady suspicion, and initially, JJ was no exception. Hey, what's with your friend? JJ asked after meeting Alistair a few times. What? I wasn't sure what he meant. What do you mean? He's always hanging around, staring at me like I'm a thief and he's guarding Fort Knox. I laughed. It's just that he knows what a treasure I am, I joked. JJ grins. Alistair's from back home. We grew up together. He looks out for me. Oh. JJ was silent. A few moments passed while we sipped overpriced, overly sweet mochachinos. That's good. Gradually, Alistair realized that JJ would be around for a while, and after a suitable amount of surveillance, questioning, and I suppose, sniffing for traces of Wendigo, he uncrossed his arms and began to relax. They even went to a few motocross races together, and once in a while I'd have to zip across the street to drag JJ home from one of their legendary late-night Gran Turismo tournaments. Alistair didn't know I wanted a baby so badly so soon. JJ and I tried for a year, but nothing happened. Month after month, the blood would come again. Gradually, our lovemaking grew more and more tense, heavy with the weight of purpose. Disappointed, the stones of unspoken failure became a wall we had to speak through. In time, it took a toll on our relationship, and we found ourselves moving further and further from each other. Inch by inch, the distance grew until he was falling asleep in front of the TV every night, and I was going to bed early, so I'd be asleep if he decided to come to our bed that night. When we did share the bed, sex was perfunctory and joyless. It was such a mundane way for it to end. After the breakup, Alistair was there beside me, unsure what to do other than bring me groceries and tiptoe around the apartment, making tea and covering me with blankets if I fell asleep on the sofa. He canceled our monthly searches along Hastings Street, and for a time we didn't talk about her, the sister who lurked in the shadows of our lives. Then one day, after another day of not eating, I stood up too quickly and crumpled to the floor. Not knowing what else to do, he picked me up and carried me to bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress, holding my hand, and rubbed a cool washcloth across my forehead. When I opened my eyes, the look of relief on his face made my eyes water, and I sat up and hugged him. He pushed the hair from my face, and for the first time ever, we kissed. I reached up and rubbed my hand along his jaw. He closed his eyes and his eyelashes fluttered. There was something so vulnerable and beautiful in it, my heart leapt into my throat. I had never before noticed how long his eyelashes are. I kissed his eyes, his forehead, his cheeks, his mouth. We sank into each other's arms, felt the hard edges wearing away, rubbing smooth, melting. A tidal wave rushed out, carrying all our dreams and fears and longings forward, until our bodies crashed into each other, rising and falling like the tide, pounding the shores, battering jagged upon our skin, until at last the storm broke and we collapsed to the floor like 2 canoes tossed. It was the only time we were together. When I discovered I was pregnant, I decided to wait 3 months before telling him. I counted the days, putting down tobacco at the start of each new month. 1 month, 2 months, and 1 week, 2 weeks. I was already thinking of names and rehearsing how I would tell him when the cramping started, and before I knew it, I was alone again, hugging my empty belly to myself, unable to talk about it because I could not tell anyone without first telling him, and he could never know. I was afraid another loss would push him so far down, he too would disappear. I hugged our baby's spirit close and prayed she understood. Sometimes now, on our late-night missions down Hastings Street, I imagine her with Chloe, walking hand in hand down the beach, laughing and singing as the sunlight glows on their skin. And I roll down the window, feeling the breeze flow through my hair. Chimigwech, thank you so much. so much. I think that there's time for questions, if anyone has any questions. There's a mic here. Don't be shy. Questions, comments, poetry you'd like to share?
Hi, thank you so much. I just was wondering about the kind of audience that you think about when you're writing. Is it primarily your own communities, or do you acknowledge or keep in mind settler readers?
Is this working? You can hear me? Okay. I actually really don't think that much about who's going to be reading what I'm writing. I just write. I think since I started writing, though, I've had this this hope, this dream that those words are going to reach back to our communities. That that people in my community and other communities, people I know, people I don't know, people who are kind of like me, might be reading them. And I think in some cases that's somewhat true, but I think the reality for a lot of us is that it's the audience for our work. A lot of times, people who are buying our books are not from our communities, and that's okay too, because I think when I write, I'm just trying to illuminate certain things. I'm trying to tell stories, dispel myths and stereotypes and so on, and just, provide. I think partly what it is, when I was young, I didn't see those kinds of stories. I read a lot, but I didn't really see myself reflected in the stories that I was reading. And I loved to read and I loved literature, but it wasn't the world I knew. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Hey, hi, Robin. Speaking of people from home.
Hi. You brought a lot of life reading the story, and I appreciated that. And I was wondering two things: if this was inspired by any stories of people that you know in your real life, and in particular, who the character of Alistair was inspired by, and how you created them.
He was inspired by a lot of different people. I think most of my characters are. There are little traits and things that I notice in people, or sometimes things that they do, like the idea of when he, in the first part of the story, when he raises his hand and does the shooting motion. I saw someone do that driving around that area in Vancouver. And so, it stuck with me, obviously, and the conversation about why that was done and so on stuck with me. And so that inspired part of the Alistair character. Sometimes things that people do or I hear people say, I think about and I try and understand why they did it, and a whole story comes out of it. I create, a background and reason to try to make sense of what's happening around me. But no characters are really just based on one person. I kind of, when I'm writing, I don't really think that way. I just remember bits and pieces of things. Yeah. Thanks for your question.
Okay. Honestly, I just saw this microphone and I completely blanked. I'm really shy for that. I apologize. But I just want to say thank you so much. What you provided now as well was such an impactful and phenomenal, story and everything. All the angles and all the personalities and all the emotions, I got shivers so many times, you know, I got tears in my eyes, just like the way that you worded and created that and everything. Thank you so much for sharing also that portion with us and everything, like, truly.
Rich, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's actually sometimes that I like reading that story because I think it's a good story, but it's a hard story for me to read sometimes because I get caught up in it a little bit too because I have to portray that emotion, and there are things about it that make me want to cry, you know. So thank you.
There's just such beautiful parts as well that it just draws that as well.
Well, I think, you know, for a story to be rich and meaningful, that it can't stick, it can't stay with one emotion for too long. You know, and that's what our communities are like. That's what life is like. You know, there's so much sadness, and in my community, there's sadness, and you know, there's loss and there's grief. But through those times, we laugh and we tease each other, and there's joy and there's beauty at the same time, and it's what helps, you know, us to get through that. It's what you know, is behind our survivance. So, miigwech. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I was wondering, what are the challenges of publishing unknown writers, or even known writers?
Sorry, publishing?
Unknown writers?
Unknown writers. Oh, okay. There are many, actually. The biggest challenge is that, you know, there are challenges on the side of working with those less experienced writers, those emerging writers, because sometimes they come to us and they have strange ideas about what being a writer is and what it means to get published. You know, these days, getting your book published is like one part of the work. Unless you're already known, you really have to be out there doing things, talking to people, you know, taking opportunities to, you know, read your work for people and that sort of thing. So that's a whole learning curve for a lot of emerging writers. On the other side, trying to get reviews and other kinds of opportunities to get that person's voice known and the book sold and, you know, get the work out there is really challenging. You know, the Canadian publishing industry is so closed in so many ways, not very risk-taking in a lot of ways. You know, so I've seen some books that I think were really phenomenal that we published that really didn't get the attention that I think they deserved and continue to deserve. I'm thinking, for example, of Daniel Heath Justice's fantasy trilogy, which is amazing, and it was so hard to promote that book. It didn't fit into people's preconceived notions of either Indigenous literature or fantasy, sci-fi lit either, and so it was an eye-opener for Daniel and for us, and it was really hard. You know, it's developed a kind of a following, but I really think it should have been much more broadly known than it was. That's one example. There were others as well that just didn't take off. And we, you know, at Kegedonce Press, one of the things that we try to do is expand people's understanding of Indigenous literatures, and you know, through projects like the Indigenous Erotica anthology. We did an anthology. We've done a couple of anthologies where we collaborated with Indigenous publishers in other countries, so one in Aotearoa, one in Australia. And when you do those new things, it's great because it pushes at those walls and those boundaries, but at the same time, the practical things like where do bookstores put it on the shelf and all those kinds of things become really problematic. And so sometimes that works against us. So if we were in it only for book sales, we wouldn't choose the books that we publish. But we do it because it's important for us to get those voices out there and to support emerging Indigenous writers, to support our writers and give them another stage for their work. So we keep at it.
Would endorsing like the books of new writers be an option, like a famous, more well-known writer or of Indigenous people would endorse like a book of a less known writer? Would that work for getting it out there or no?
It helps. I mean, we get people to blurb our books and so on, and it helps. But there's so many pieces that sort of have to come together to do that. And in some cases, there's just something happens. It's the right book at the right time, and so it just takes off, and and usually deservedly so. But for each of those, there's probably 10 other books that would deserve the same amount of attention and don't get it. So there's a certain amount of it that's just sort of beyond anyone's control. But we try to do everything that we can, and and we try to also continue to work in ways that uphold Indigenous values and the goals of Kegedonce and the goals of the writer. So when we look at what success means to us, it's not always the same as what it might mean in the mainstream. So for example, somebody might send us a manuscript, and really the idea is to preserve a story, to pass it down. And so if that's done, that's considered a success by the author. It's not necessarily that they're looking for huge book sales or fame or whatever, but there's a different meaning behind it, and a different idea of what success would mean for that book and for that writer. So we try to, remember that and uphold that as well. Any others?
I could just shout. My name is Kateri. I wondered if you could just speak a little bit more about the prayer walkers and where they're going.
Yeah, the prayer walk, it was started by Brandon Emerson, a young man from my community. Decided he was going to do it. A few other people rallied around him and started organizing. A few people decided they were going to walk with him. So I think there's a group of maybe about 6 now who are walking, and their plan is, they started at Anishinaabe. Their plan is to walk to the west coast. I don't know their exact route, but they're going to walk to the west coast and then back all the way to the east coast, I believe, and then I think come back home. So really they will have gone back and forth across the country. They have it all kind of mapped out and so on, but I can't remember the routes and what exactly they're planning. But the idea of it is really about prayer and praying for those girls and women who are missing and their families, as well as to pray that we don't lose anyone else. So they are on Facebook. You can follow them on Facebook. You can look for it. I can maybe, I should have posted the link, but I didn't think of it. But I can maybe get you the links and so on. They're looking for donations as well to help fund their walk, because they need a van or something so they can move the walkers around and spell each other off and that sort of thing. And they basically just decided they were going to do it, sold some sweatshirts and things, and very quickly they pulled it all together and left, and are kind of having faith in the communities to support them and to provide what they'll need as they go. They just left with whatever they had, basically. So if you can support the walk, I encourage you to do that. As time goes on, I think they're going to need, more and more things.
Doyaksem Christina Gray Dewai. My name is Christina Gray, and I thank you in Somaliak, my language on my own side, for the Tsimshian people. I wanted to ask you if you could provide some context to the story Chloe in describing Vancouver. You're talking about Hastings, and I was just wondering if you can provide some background as to what was going on in your life. Like, were you there working at that time, or were you visiting? I think that would be interesting for us all.
Yeah, I used to spend quite a bit of time in Vancouver. That's actually how I know Susan and her partner Jay. I spent some time working at the Anaukin Center in the Okanagan in Penticton, and so would go into Vancouver. But for a time in my life, I was out in Vancouver quite a bit and would stay there for weeks at a time and so on, and got to know Vancouver fairly well. Was around, I'm trying to remember when I actually started writing that story, but I think it was sort of around the whole Picton thing. So I was spending a lot of time with people, who were living out there, who were from there, and so on. Yeah. I never lived in Vancouver. I just was in and out for days or weeks or months at a time. For about a period of maybe 10 years or so, I was there quite a bit.
Thank you so much. I have a question about your publishing processes. At the end of one of his collections, Drew Hayden Taylor talks about the complexities of sometimes creating fiction, drawing inspiration from the stories of communities to which you don't belong. And so I wondered if that's something that you had to have conversations around during publishing processes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Really, it hasn't been an issue so far with us. There are things that come up that, are challenging to, to work through. Usually the writers that Kegedonce publishes are known to us. We haven't been in a situation where that many people, of the people that we publish are just sort of sending in submissions and we don't know them in some way or other. Occasionally that does happen, but we haven't really come across that. I don't know that, if we're talking about appropriation, I think sometimes it's obvious that that's what's happening. Other times it can be less obvious for a while. And so we're very aware of that. And like I said, when I was speaking before, it's not that I don't think we'll ever make a mistake, but I think to a certain extent, being so immersed in the community, it's less likely that we'll encounter that as much. I don't think that too many people, I think people who are doing that would be less likely to come to Kegedonce as a place to publish their work.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think the last statement you said there was probably what I was thinking. I don't know who would come to publish or who would be ballsy enough to be doing that. But I want to thank you. Kateri, I think you sharing your words of wisdom with us today, I really appreciated seeing the authors on there and seeing the history and the timeline from how far back they went. So I really appreciated that, and the story. Yeah, I think you took us through a lot of emotions, but I think the picture that you're able to create through this story that makes it so real, and I think if I'm hopeful that when people hear that they start to understand differently, and to those outside the Indigenous community start to take bigger steps to make changes. For us. So I want to thank you for that. We do have a small gift for you on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and the Waterloo Indigenous Students Center and the committee organizing the event. Michael here has a gift for you. And,
thank you so much.
Working at the center, and we just want to thank you. So if everybody could join me in a round of applause. It's awesome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It really was a gift to be invited here and to have so many people come and engage with what I was saying and with the story, and it's a gift to see old friends and to meet new people. So thank you. This is just like bonus. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.